Hello everyone, welcome to Worldline Rise India chapter. Today we are here to discuss, on cross-border. So our topic for discussion is going to be going beyond borders, unlocking the potential of global market. And we have some eminent panelists here with me to discuss on this topic. So we have Ramesh Narasimhan. He's head of digital commerce India business at Worldline. So for India, cross-border is one of the strategic priorities. So let's hear his views around that topic. We've got Monroe, who's joining us from Georgia. He's the global head for media and digital businesses at Worldline Digital Commerce. And we have Mike Goodenough, who's joining us from France. He heads the global e-retail business for us at Worldline Digital Commerce. So I guess it's truly a cross-border panel as well. For us, people joining from 3 different corners of the world, and looking forward to a great discussion here, gentlemen, with all of you. So let me start my question, my discussion here with the question around, pandemic. When we look at COVID, so it has, clearly accelerated digitization, across the world. I just wanted to understand, from all of you in terms of how do we see, cross-border merchants in this scenario aligning, their expansion plans and aligning their growth strategies. So let's start with Mike, if you can share your perspectives around this topic.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for inviting me, first of all, Rahul, Ramesh and Andrew. Nice to be involved. I think, indeed, the first reaction when we talk about the pandemic or COVID is, of course, the positive impact that it's had on e-retail. But it's not been just as simple as consumers immediately switching to online payments and online purchases. What we've seen is that certain elements of e-retail has grown very fast, of course, and that's driven by the consumer demand. And I think the biggest challenge was the speed with which the retailers had to move in order to capture that demand. And it's not just a domestic market. So as we saw consumers leaving the high street, there was an element of panic, particularly among those retailers that relied very heavily on face-to-face sales. And of course, just focusing on their home market would not necessarily fill the gap that was created by this change in behavior. So I think what we saw very much was the rise in cross-border focus, where merchants, particularly in the UK or Europe, were looking at countries and regions close to them initially, because that supported their ability to ship goods and be able to certainly pivot quite quickly. But of course, beyond that, after 18 months, we see that e-retailers really see that this is going to be here for a while, and they need to even expand their growth plans. And that's where we see them looking at other continents, looking at growth markets, whereby they can be, growing their top line. And I think this is something that is driven by many elements that we'll talk later, but I think they're looking for partners that can help them to be able to fuel the growth that they need.
Sure, got it. Clearly, I think, the high street has been the biggest loser, where face-to-face transactions have totally evaporated. And we are seeing people moving online and contactless, and this is the phenomena we are experiencing across the world. So clearly, I think this trend is here to stay. Coming to you, Andrew. So what has been your observation, in the verticals that you drive for Worldline in the digital space?
Yeah, so Mike touched on a lot of points, and at the risk of sounding redundant, I think I might repeat a couple of them.
Go for it,
because Andrew. Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I represent more digital goods and services. So whereas Mike is more physical goods distributed internationally, purchased online, but then kind of shipped. My goods are just digital goods, and it covers anything that you can think of. So we have video games, we have streaming audio, streaming video, you have fitness and lifestyle, online videos, video conferencing, e-learning. And if you look at the, what the pandemic has done, is it's forced companies to really focus on their digital strategy. I was reading a McKinsey report the other day, and it said that just that the pandemic itself had accelerated the share of digital or digitally enabled products in companies' portfolios by 7 years. So it sped up the digital adoption of these initiatives within companies by 7 years. And actually funding for digital initiatives was the highest cost center within companies in a survey that McKinsey did. So it's having a massive impact. And yeah, it's all about finding the right way to distribute and finding the right way to monetize the digital goods and services. So, if I have an online video game, my question should be, what business model am I going to use to actually monetize it? Do I need a subscription? Should I go with microtransactions? Should I monetize via creator content, which you see a lot of companies doing nowadays? And also, where am I going to monetize it? So where is the biggest chunk of consumer demand? And that's what's driving the increase in digitization and also driving the increase in cross-border. Because once you have that digital good and that service, and once you know that it works, then it's up to you to really do your research and realize, where can I best distribute this electronically to the consumers that are actually demanding the type of product that I have? And so we've been helping, all of those aforementioned industries, whether it's streaming video or streaming audio. Obviously, a lot of fitness and lifestyle companies looking to get their stuff out there. And so, yeah, I mean, it's as crazy as the past 18 months have been. It's actually been quite fun for us because we get to really help these companies, do these kind of global cross-border monetization strategies.
Sure. So clearly, even in our market in India, we've seen this digital businesses flourishing like crazy today, whether it is in education, gaming, even content and entertainment. People locked, in their homes for last 18 months, might as well. They have the only connection they have with the outside world is virtual. So clearly, there are a lot of new businesses which we are seeing growing and mushrooming in India in these spaces. I feel, that's a big opportunity here as well.
And like Mike said, it's not going away either. It's not like once things get more back to normal, that people will just abandon all of their digital initiatives and companies will shift resources into other areas. It's here to stay. It may taper off from the acceleration that we've seen in the past 18 months, but all of the initiatives that people are doing today, it's not just to capitalize on a snapshot of increased consumer demand. It's what you're doing now will help you capitalize now, but it will also pay dividends going forward because, it's going to continue to be like this for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. And like you said, I think your key word, Andrew, is like acceleration. I mean, this was going to happen. Yeah. This was going to happen in 5-10 years anyway. And Andrew mentioned 7. So this is just an acceleration of the digitalization of many of these industries, gaming, digital, e-retail.
And, we are seeing a lot of education also in India, specifically moving online. And, clearly digital bridges the gap, right? What physical world probably has not been able to fulfill. India has been a very low, penetrated market from the education institute's perspective because of its sparse geography spread. Digital is actually trying to bridge that gap to a very large extent in terms of quality of education. So I'm very clear, I'm sure with you on this, that this is not going away. It's a trend here to stay. And there are a lot of businesses we are seeing here, which are actually getting created on pure digital interfaces and only digital origins. Moving to you, Ramesh. So what are your views on Indian businesses that are focusing on international expansion, and how have they transformed in the changing environment?
Yeah, and before I address that question specifically, Rahul, I just want to add to what Mike and Andrew have said, and the digitalization, everything as you appropriately captured is the same situation in India. But what it has done to us, the Indian economy, is it has extended at a very fast pace what is called as digital inclusion, or financial inclusion. It has grown, and that is a huge step for a country like India. You know, financial inclusion, micro entrepreneurs, people doing small, jobs, doing stuff who used to always deal in cash, have now come into the digital fold. You know, which means that with financial inclusion, once they have a bank account and the banks are able to track them, then they're able to borrow money at the rate of interest that we get. Otherwise, they're exposed to very usurious rates of interest, right? So this is the other good thing that's happened in a country like India, and that's irreversible. Trust me, I mean, it will only accelerate even further, and it will not come back. So that's one point that I wanted to capture about the financial inclusion in India. But coming back to the question you asked, Rahul, which is on Indian businesses that focus on international markets, right? I mean, so going back a little bit in history, India's position in global trade has seen a significant shift in the last 2 to 3 decades. Whether it be related to product mix or destination markets, right? And with the rising digital influence on consumers globally, which is what Mike and Andrew have talked about, online as a channel for trade is also witnessing growth. Now, if you look back at India's traditional exports, which is textiles, apparel, gems and jewelry, minerals, and other commodities like tea, coffee, sugar, etc., Indian exporters are now significantly focused on technology-based and value-added products, right? This is a huge change from the past. Just the export of software services last year, which is the year 2020-2021 financial year, exceeded $148 billion US dollars, right? Almost 150 billion, and registered a growth of 2%, despite the pandemic. So, now, if you talk about tourism into India, has expanded significantly due to the Incredible India campaign, which impacted the growth of travel and OTA service providers, right? Now, this industry has been hit by the pandemic. We understand that, but it will see a rebound at some point in time, maybe early next year, maybe late this year. We still have 3.5 months to go in this year. And we're already witnessing a growth in domestic tourism. So for all the players who are offering products and solutions in this area, exports, they have to, we have seen, and companies are working towards it, is to diversify their destination, export destination, offering, so that they can capture a wider spectrum of opportunity. Lastly, I read a report by KPMG on global cross-border. And it said that B2C e-commerce is set to rise. This is B2C mind, which is direct consumers buying B2C e-commerce. And this is global cross-border, is expected to rise at 25% CAGR and hit some stratospheric levels of 1.5 trillion, etc. So maybe those numbers might change because of the pandemic, but certainly there's no dearth of buyers. Cross-border buyers, whether it be in Western Europe or in the America or in Asia Pacific, there's no dearth of cross-border buyers. And as Mike and Andrew have validated that data inputs, the companies themselves are focused, and it's a trend that's not going to go away. So I think that's how I see Indian companies looking at exports and looking at international markets. This is how I see the trend shaping up now.
Sure. So clearly India is on rise, as well, as we see India, dominating the position. Coming to you, Mike, again, for my second question. So when we look at, e-retail as a segment, what are the high potential verticals and geographies where you basically are seeing the growth coming from? And it will be really helpful if you can also give us some examples, some use cases, from your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a brief overview. So yeah, indeed, what we see. So we, as a business, we're targeting really the tier 1 e-retailers, particularly fashion, beauty, nutrition, and electronics, and we tend to look at those markets which are very strong from a cross-border perspective. So we have corridors of focus as a team where we see not just the target market, increasing in demands, but also where that market is being serviced from. So we see these corridors, and for us, we see business from where merchants are located in China, for instance. So that's like the core of the manufacturing for fashion and fast fashion and electronics, and they're targeting, certainly India. They're targeting Russia, Europe, the US, and this is one of our largest growth markets. As an organization, our capabilities are growing alongside that. So when we look at other corridors as well, we see the next huge markets, consumer markets, as being certain territories in Latin America, such as Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Mexico. We also see Russia. We see South Korea as another massive market that's growing, and it's linked to an increase in disposable income. It's an increase in connectivity. It's the access to payment methods, and I think Ramesh talked a lot about, cash disappearing in society, and that's certainly accelerating massively in India, but also the rest of the world. So the ability to pay online with many of these methods helps to drive that expansion. And then we do see corridors of goods coming the other way. It tends to be then, manufacturers of maybe high-end goods or region-specific goods in Europe, which focus also on the countries I mentioned, but back into China, for instance. So you see the fast fashion coming from China into the rest of the world, and then some of the recognizable premium brands going back into China and India, etc. So we definitely see this like I mentioned in my earlier answer, the focus of these e-retailers on these particular markets where they can expand the growth of their products.
Sure. Interesting data points here, Mike. So, when you look at digital goods, Andrew, do you see similar geographies, or the demand come from different geographies? And which are the popular segments that we look at, or verticals that we look at in digital, which is growing fast?
From a geographic standpoint, I guess that's the right word. We see similar to what Mike was saying. We focus more on what we consider to be the more challenging geographies. So there's easier ones that you can help people go cross-border into, and then there's ones that they're tough nuts to crack. It's tough to figure out just because there's high barriers to entry. There's a very complex kind of payments ecosystem that exists within those markets. There's a wide variety of different payment methods. There's certain regulations that have to be upheld in order to enter those markets. Those are the ones that we really help focus, or help our merchants focus on, because that's where we can provide the biggest value add to our merchants. And normally those markets too, have a high number of e-commerce users. They have a high population in general, but they're also more digitally savvy as a high population. And it's the ones that Mike was saying. So cross-border into India has been a big focus for us. Into South Korea, especially from a video gaming standpoint, because culturally they're more of a video gaming type of culture. In Latin America, specifically Brazil, but then also some of the other countries in Latin America. And so it's helping, our merchants navigate the complexities that exist within those markets and really create a solution where they're casting as wide of a net as possible when they go into those markets, to make sure that if you are going to go cross-border, that you're doing it and you're putting yourself in front of the maximally highest possible number of consumers that you can, instead of just taking the easy route and you're doing and that consumer revenue. So those are the markets that we've really been focused on. Russia is another one. Well, a reverse cross-border expats that are actually in other countries, but they still want to use the method of their home country. I think China is a really good example there. So there's Chinese expats that live all over the world and may live use their local Chinese payment methods. And so it's helping organizations understand that methods for the local folks that live there, but all expats that live there just want to use kind of their local payment methods.
Sure, sure. Thank you, Andrew, for that. Ramesh, coming to you. So how do you see, the high potential verticals? Which are the high potential verticals? And, are you seeing any change in trends, over the last few years in India, and geographies, Indian merchants are today targeting?
Yes, Rahul, and that goes in line with what I said earlier. The nature of the basket of Indian goods being exported is undergoing a significant change. And, the same KPMG study says that, the business opportunities for Indian brands in some verticals was at about $15 billion about 3 to 4 years ago, and is expected to double, right, starting 2022 and the coming few years. Now, in this, clearly, there are multiple verticals that work, but I will talk about specifically just 2 or 3. Travel and OTAs is one big segment. Media, entertainment, software as a service, consumer brands, jewelry. These are some of the popular verticals where Indian exporters are exporting goods. Now, I'll talk about travel first, which is flying into India, right? And both business travelers and tourists, right, are the potential drivers, right? And the Indian market is very lucrative in this segment because many global businesses have invested substantially to gain a share of this market, right? In addition, India gaining prominence as the back office of the world also attracts significant business travelers. And then, of course, I mentioned the Incredible India campaign, which is kindling the keen interest in India as a tourist destination, right? And so international traveler inflow into India is expected to bounce back to about 12 million by 2022. And at the same time, when they come in, whether it's tourists or business travelers, they have to pay. So, accommodation is expected to grow by approximately 12%, which is really good because the pandemic has impacted the travel and OTA industry significantly. We know that almost 25-30% of the hotel and restaurants in the country have permanently shut down because of the pandemic. So the arrival of global travelers, global tourists will make a huge impact on this on this particular segment in India, right? And what will enable this is, of course, what I would say is dynamic, targeted pricing and marketing campaigns, and user-friendly digital solutions when in course of travel booking and experience, especially using mobile platforms with diverse payment modes. So this is something that I see as a significant gainer once the fear of the pandemic goes down, right? And businesses open up, borders open up. Already, many countries which were hesitant to open up now have opened up, and we are expecting travel to start across continents very soon. Within Europe, there is things, the whole European continent has opened up to intra-Europe travel, and so across we'll see more countries opening up and travel and OTA growing. The second one I'll talk about is the software as a service, and this is something that the advent of the cloud and everything has changed the dynamics of the software industry globally. And, software with the kind of manpower that we have, in especially around IT services, it's logical that, somewhere from services, people will move on to building products and offer software as a service, right? And this segment, software as a service segment, is expected to grow in the high 30s over the next few years, right? In terms of percentage growth. And as I said, SaaS adoption, cloud first, these are all gaining prominence globally. And, the advantage that Indian SaaS companies have is to leverage this talent, right? And it's abundantly available. It's much cheaper than in Western markets, right? And so you have basic competitive advantages built in to address the market. And just this week, Rahul, we had an Indian company called Freshworks, IPO on the NASDAQ. And, now they're valued at 12 billion, over 12 billion. This demonstrates the potential for success for Indian SaaS companies, right? This is something that they can, and they have customers across the globe. Now, the third one is, media and entertainment. And as Mike said, Bollywood is a famous name outside India as well. And it's always the Indian expats, like Mike talked about Chinese expats who are home, they want to use their own payment methods. Indian expats like the same thing. They want to watch Indian movies. We have 125 languages, so we can make that many more movies, right? And the content and how it's delivered, whether it's music, whether it's film, it's short stories, web series, and it's across the board. There's significant Indian population in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and of course, in the US itself, right? And even in Western Europe. Right, so it's a huge population which consumes this, and slowly some of this is getting consumed by non-Indians as well. And it was interesting to note that the Apple 13 launch had music from one of India's iconic movies of the 70s. The music piece was of that movie in the iPhone 13 launch, and that got caught in the press very strongly, right? So some of these things are growing. So this will always remain a big market for content providers to serve, again, educational service providers, edtech providers to serve. So these are all, industries which are bound to grow based on the fact that Indian expats outside are themselves a growing pool of consumers. Now, apart from this, there are other specific segments that cater only to Indian expats, like, classifieds, real estate, right? And all these things. But I think these three major segments, in addition to some of the new consumer brands which are coming up in India, the D2C kind of brands, which are able to hold their ground against, large companies like Unilevers of the world, Procter & Gamble, make a niche for themselves. And these guys are aggressive. They're hungry for growth. And Andrew said, they're not stopping at India's borders. They're happy to go into other markets and find customers. So clearly, for some of these companies, the global markets act as a, for them, the segment, they're not scared to go out and step out and go global and, and access those markets and sell their wares. So I think this is the way it is going for Indian companies. These would be some of the segments. I'll not be surprised if some newer segments also open up for Indian companies, right? So that's how I see it, Rahul, for Indian companies in terms of segments. Over to you.
Thanks, Ramesh. I think it looks very, very promising, both for physical goods as well as digital goods coming out of India to the rest of the world. Coming to you, Andrew, with my last question of the discussion. So when you look at your segment, digital goods and services and gaming, what are some of the key growth drivers you think which businesses need to consider or businesses need to leverage for effective geographic expansion?
All right, good question. And let me know if I break up a little bit. My computer is giving me some issues, as it always does during these types of things, but I'll give it my best shot here. So yeah, for me, it's the combination of, figuring out the right way to distribute the content, first of all, figuring out the right way to monetize the content. So when you look at payment strategy in general, a lot of times people focus just on the payment methods themselves and not necessarily in the way in which you're monetizing it. To me, I think it's more important to focus on how you're going to monetize the goods and services as a growth driver, and then follow that up with the right payments, because the payments have to match the monetization model. And so the monetization model therefore has to come first. For example, if you're choosing to monetize via subscriptions, and obviously your payment mix is going to be heavily towards the ones that support recurring payments. If your monetization model is focused on microtransactions, then your payment mix is going to be focused on those payment methods that have low fixed fees, because the higher the fixed fees, the more it makes that an untenable solution, because it's going to eat away at your margins. So really looking at the right way to monetize it. And that's also looking at the consumer's expectations. So what are the consumers expecting to do? And every country has a very unique way of consumers expecting to pay. So some are scared of subscriptions, some expect subscriptions, some don't like microtransactions, some like, kind of bigger lump sum purchases, and some, it's the other way around. They prefer the microtransactions. And so it's a big exercise of knowing the market, knowing who you're going after, knowing the expectations of the consumer, and then designing everything, kind of reverse engineering everything to make sure that you're putting the right monetization model with the right payment methods in front of the consumer at the right time. And that to me is going to be kind of the biggest combination of growth drivers. And like I said, what keeps it interesting and where I think, we've been able to really add value to our merchants is when you look at some of the more complex countries in the world and really go in there and say, okay, here's what the consumer mix looks like. Here's what they're expecting on how to monetize the content. Here's what we recommend. And then coming in with this full strategy and say, okay, here's how you're going to tackle this market, rather than just, scraping the surface by saying they like this payment method and they like this payment method. Yeah.
Sure. Very insightful. Shortly, it's come through a lot of learning from your side and a lot of experience, handling these categories. And it's going to be really, really handy for companies in the digital space who are looking to expand out of India to newer geographies to consider these points that you just mentioned, Andrew. Thanks for that. Mike, coming to you, what would you say as the success mantra and key drivers for physical goods?
Yeah, again, of course, I'm a bit disappointed to be going after Andrew this time, because he's now had the opportunity to say all of the interesting things. But no, joking apart, look, I think this is just a really exciting time for us and also for merchants, because the opportunities are there. I would approach the question in a slightly different way. So when I'm speaking to our clients and we're helping them expand, I really do focus on what I call like the 4 enablers of cross-border, and I think it shouldn't really surprise anybody. So I mean, the first one is how quickly this has happened. We touched on it earlier. If you think that Nike, Under Armour, many of these really big customers that we've known online, we think for a long time, they really only changed their strategy around 2017, 2018 with the direct to consumer approach. So that's really, the first enabler is now the fact that, direct to consumer is clearly recognized as the way to go in the future. I think the second enabler is, the multiple touch points that a retailer would need, but also the impact of social commerce. And you see that through separate platforms being used to drive demand in new markets, but also built into, applications themselves. So if you look at, again, global retailers like ASOS or Shein, they're really using their own marketing within the app to drive the growth of cross-border. Andrew touched on this, and I think it's really important, and it's the consumer journey and in order to really reduce friction in that consumer journey, the need is to improve the localization. So I'm not necessarily talking about shipping the goods locally or setting up local entities with huge amounts of staff. I'm talking about the consumer feeling like it's local. So we understand that even for big companies, the resources that you need in order to support not just the local payment methods, but the local language support, the currency support. Many companies, they don't have 30 people in treasury and payments in order to do this. So, to Andrew's point, what we look to do is try and simplify this element and say, look, we already have the connections. We can localize to a certain element, and then with the use of data, when that market grows, we can support the client in truly localizing more. So in the example of retail, there can be a step-by-step approach to maybe delivering certain SKUs in day one, and then gradually localizing more physically when we've helped that market to become much more important. And I think the fourth and the last one is really the interesting one, I think, for us to watch develop. So that's really how innovation has become the enabler for growth. So, you know, one of the examples that I see, and it's something that's been very big in China for a long time, and that's the rise of live shopping. So you can imagine now in COVID times that the ability to physically be in a store and touch and feel and buy fashion, for instance, is greatly reduced. So you see that having the ability to be in a live shopping experience and get closer to the goods and give the merchant the opportunity to give you the feel that you're actually in a store is incredibly important. And we see that exploding out of China into other Asian countries, into Europe and the US. And I think, again, the ability for your partner like Worldline to be able to support in the innovation side of things, you know, whether it's through bots, whether it's through gamification of the checkout, live shopping. I mean, I think these are really important elements to separate one retailer from another in some of these newer markets for them.
Sure. Clearly very insightful points here, Mike. And some of the trends you spoke about, we are already observing in India, whether it is, you know, D2C commerce, which is growing, you know, with lots and lots of players going on their own, moving out of marketplaces.
Yeah.
And clearly on the live shopping, you know, aspect as well, we are seeing social commerce and live shopping also picking up steam in India.
We've seen in China, we've seen the same thing with India, right? So we've seen some of the regulation around marketplaces has forced, you know, mid-sized merchants to move away from that marketplace, like you mentioned, and they really need to accelerate their direct-to-consumer model to ensure that they maintain their revenue. So it's a really good point, Rahul.
Yeah, sure. Ramesh, coming to you again in the end. So don't get angry that Mike and Andrea have picked up your points. So you know, as we are aware that India is working, you know, very strategically on cross-border and specifically focusing both merchants wanting to service Indian customers, get into Indian consumers, and vice versa, where businesses wanting to go out and leverage, you know, our pan across the globe presence. So what is it that we have, you know, as part of our proposition, you know, for Indian merchants who are looking to expand globally, you know, as part of our USPs here? Do you want to elaborate?
I'll elaborate on that, Rahul. That's a good question. But before that, you know, I just want to make a quick point personally. You know, we talked about live shopping and some other things that new innovations are coming. But I can tell you how cross-border can be very light on a father's pocket. You know, my kids wanted to buy some video games, and so they have a Sony PlayStation. And Steam had a sale, and the same game on Steam, but it runs on the Windows PC, was available at 150 rupees. The same game is available on Sony PlayStation at some 4,000 or 5,000 bucks. To me, it was a no-brainer. I just said, buy two of them if you want. 150 bucks is very low. So as Andrew said, you know, how you have to decide first how to monetize, and then you have to work towards the markets and do the right thing. So here, let me delve into our cross-border value proposition that we are building for our customers, and let me, you know, talk about it as well. So, you know, some of our local businesses, how are they approaching internationalization? Basically, a multi-pronged strategy, and with omni-channel presence, multiple channels, product localization. That's something that even Mike talked about. You know, and then monetization, and then local payment methods. Right? These are some of the things that some of our D2C businesses, who, as I said, are brave, crossing the borders, and you know, trying to establish in other markets. And this is where we come with our cross-border solution. And you know, as Worldline, our ability to provide payment connectivity across 175 countries and a full service offering, right, with an integrated global payment platform, really empowers you know, Indian businesses to reach millions of consumers globally, right, and expand their business. And the key value proposition is with a single integration into our pipe anywhere in the world. The customers or the merchants can reach, and we cover over 150 plus payment methods. They can pick their preferred region, popular local payment products as per their global strategy, right? And we maintain relationships in each of our markets with acquirers and alternate payment methods they're able to provide. So, we're able to provide right from authorization to acceptance, processing the settlement, refunds, and chargebacks. So, the key value proposition is, single integration into our pipe, and they get access. Indian merchants wanting to go overseas can get access to over 135 markets, right? And we have expertise on local payments, like we have on this panel. Mike, who's been in Europe for so many years, Andrew, who represents Americas, and that's the kind of expertise we bring to the table, right? And we can help Indian merchants, choose the preferred payment mode based on their need to get into local markets, give wider coverage and higher conversion, right? So this clearly is our solution, a single integration into our pipe, and we bring the expertise of Worldline globally to Indian merchants. That's really the value proposition, as I can state as simply as possible.
Sure, clearly. So basically go global by being local in 175 different countries. So that is the value proposition that Worldline India gets you. With this, we come to an end of this discussion. I think we've overshot our time as well. I thank you all for very valuable insights. I'm sure, the insights are going to be very handy for businesses out of India wanting to expand in the global territories, with experience from both Andrew and Mike in their respective categories, and Ramesh, who gets, business experience for local knowledge from India. The inputs are very, very valuable for everyone to consume. Thanks a lot, and we'll catch you soon on the other side. Thank you, guys.